Welcome to Our Kids, Our Schools, your compass in the world of local education, hosted by Alexis Morgan, an experienced guide and advocate. This space offers insights designed to serve parents, teachers, administrators, school board members, and community stakeholders. Every episode is designed to equip you with the knowledge and tools to be an active participant. This podcast isn't just a dialogue, it's a movement. A movement that encourages collaboration to foster a thriving school community, because together, we will make a difference. Hey friends, welcome to the podcast. Today I talk with Amy Curtis, a local to Boise therapist who has been practicing for nearly 30 years. We dive into the world of teenagers, a very important component of our school community. Hope you enjoy the conversation. For anyone that's watching, with these like puff sleeves, to denote, yes, shoulder pads, which were so 80s and 90s. Shoulder pads.
Yes.
I was trying to go for something 80s because we're talking about the Breakfast Club today.
I know. And it's like the best part of the 80s was in the Breakfast Club.
I know. And I'm just really disappointed
that I didn't come dressed for the occasion.
I'm sad you didn't come dressed for the occasion today.
Well, I lost my crimper. That's why.
You lost it?
Yeah.
You did
it's
not.
It's probably somewhere at my mom's house, buried in a drawer.
Crimping like came back recently.
I know.
I've seen you with crimped hair. It looks really good.
Yeah, those are wave curlers.
Oh, wave curlers. I guess that's true.
Crimpers are kind of like cubey and yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Well, so I'm really glad that you're here today with me talking about, or we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about teenagers today. And I'm really excited that you're here because you are like my go-to resident on all things psych concepts because you are a therapist.
I know. And I love teenagers. Like
yes.
I think teens are the coolest people on the planet because they are so awkwardly authentic. And I just think they're cool to be around.
I totally agree. I love spending time with teenagers. It's one of my favorite things in substitute teaching is I like to be at the high school with the teenagers.
Yeah.
Because they're like a no BS. They live in a no BS world.
Yeah.
They want you to be real so they can be real and you can all be real together.
Yeah, that's so true, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I wanted to, before we kind of like really dive into this conversation, I wanted to, because this is the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast, which is so cool, by the way. I love that you're here with me on this. I want to know, before I go into this other thing, that this is kind of like our 2-year anniversary of ever being on a podcast together, because 2 years ago, we recorded a podcast together on this other podcast that I was on, and it was the very first podcast you ever recorded.
And I told you that I listened to it for the first time today because I'm so awkward listening to myself. So in 2 years from now, mark my words, I will listen to this podcast and see how we did.
Fingers crossed. I really hope
in
that's
the
true for you.
meantime, it'll live in my memory.
Yeah.
But I'm so impressed with what you've built. And it's so cool that we're doing this because I think that this message is so relevant for youth and for parents and for educators because psychology and social dynamics are a huge feature of what's happening in the schools.
Yes, I totally agree. And that's the need to talk about this for our school communities. And I got this email recently from someone that said, hey, I love what you're doing, and I'm so glad that you're informing parents. And I thought, I so appreciate that she reached out and shared that idea with me. But I was really thinking about how a school community is a lot more than parents. A school community is something that encompasses, it encompasses our schools and our parents and our students. But I'm really trying to almost define this in a way that's new because a school community are those things, our school staff, our parents, our students, but it's also everyone that resides in a school area that impacts our schools. So that includes our neighbors, our business owners, the professionals. It includes our voters and our taxpayers. All of those people are really important parts of our school community. And I'll throw in there It also includes our city leaders, like our mayor, our city council. And I actually just had a mayoral candidate come by my house and talk to me about why he wants to be chosen for this election, this runoff election that's coming. And I actually asked him, well, what are you doing for our school communities? Like, what are you doing for our community right here? And he didn't really have an answer that I felt was what I was looking for personally. And I thought, I think it's because people are not making that connection yet.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are, but some people are not. And I want more people to make that connection because we need our communities to come together to see how they are a school community, because our kids are the future and we need to make sure that we're working together as a community, all the different parts, that we're coming together to work, all the different viewpoints, right? It's not the same viewpoint. It's all the different viewpoints to come together to produce something amazing for our school communities.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about how schools are really the stage, if you will, where we develop our communities, because it's really kind of where we plant the seeds of the future in terms of our culture and our values. That's all happening in the schools. And so what happens there is so important.
I totally agree. And someone shared with me the other day that I thought was so cool, that when you go to, say, like a high school football game, you see so many people showcased at that event. Like when you go to my kids' high school, our kids go to the same high school, you've got the marching band that comes out and the cheerleaders that are there, the football players, you've got the dance team, you've got the student section, you've got tons of community members there, not just parents, but people who care about kids and football and having fun together. And then you've got that opposing side and you've got all the talent on the field then and all the different components there. I mean, there are so many people there showcasing their skills and talents. And even if that's just cheering the kids on at that event. And so I agree with you that like our schools are really often the heart of our communities.
I could not agree more.
Yeah. So, which is why I'm so glad we're talking about teenagers today. And as I referenced my 80s clothes, my look for you today with my shoulder pads here, right? My shoulder pads. This is why we're talking about like the 80s and the Breakfast Club. But why, Amy, will you tell us why the Breakfast Club?
I think the Breakfast Club really showcased teenagers in high school and all the different types of psychological dynamics and the need for acceptance and to find a purpose and belonging. And it's timeless. I remember watching it for the first time, and I was of that age when that movie was released, and I just felt like I saw myself in so many of those characters. And now I go back and I rewatch it and I just think this is still happening today. With the clients that I see and I work with, I think these dynamics are playing out. They're timeless.
Yes. And to that idea, just a year ago, I watched The Breakfast Club with she was a sophomore at that time. She was 16, my 16-year-old daughter. She was going through some stuff at school, and you had suggested, watch The Breakfast Club with her. And I watched it with her, and it was fascinating. We watched it, and I asked her right at the very end, I asked, what did you notice in that movie? Like, what are some of your takeaways? And she looked at me and she said, Mom, that was my high school. I see those things in my high school. And then it was really funny because a couple hours later, she and I were talking about just some of the social dynamics that were happening for her. And I kind of went and just shared an example from my life. I started like, hey, when I was in school, and she was like, yeah, Mom, but that was a while ago. And I said, you're right, it was. But remember how we just watched the Breakfast Club, and that took place in the 80s? I was in high school in the 90s. So those themes, and it was just like this like light switch went off in her head, and it was like, oh, my mom's not irrelevant. Like, I mean, the things are different,
Yeah.
but the themes are there. And that's what almost like I really kind of think the Breakfast Club did for that dynamic between she and I, was that she kind of got to see that, oh, the experiences that my mom had as a teenager are not irrelevant to what I'm going through today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like one of the very few 80s movies that had that kind of like staying power. Like I think Gremlins didn't age so well and other kinds of movies. And sadly, like 16 Candles, like I just waited for some dude to show up with a cake on my 16th birthday. Didn't happen.
No.
But I would say The Breakfast Club was pretty darn accurate and has stood the test of time.
Yes, it's timeless. So this movie has 5 characters, and I'm going to tell everyone that's listening that if you have not seen this movie, it's going to be okay, because we're going to really talk about the characters. But I think if you have not seen it, you're going to want to go watch it after this.
Yeah.
And if you have seen it before, I think you're still going to want to go watch it after this, because you'll start noticing the things that we talk about in these characters in the movie.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to get into some of these characters. And I think the thing that's valuable about these 5 characters are that these characters are who we see in the high schools today. Clearly, you know, these are just like a character, and they're generic, right? I mean, it's an idea. They're thank you. That's the word. Stereotypes. So the very first one is the kid who plays, his character is Brian Johnson, and this is the nerd.
Yeah.
Okay. And he makes a statement at one point there. The concept, let's talk about the concept of the Breakfast Club at first. Will you give the concept for people who haven't heard this?
Okay. So for a variety of reasons, these high school students find themselves on a Saturday morning in detention.
Yes.
And they have nothing to do with each other outside of this experience. Like they're the kind of people that would not even speak to each other in the hallways.
Exactly.
And yet they are there by themselves, and they are forced to engage one another and confront the stereotypes that kind of epitomize their lives. And so they're not only reflecting to each other how they see each other, but also how they see themselves. Mm-hmm. And they spend an entire day doing this. And then the end is so poignant, because the end is kind of this question. And I think it's Brian, the first kid we're talking about, the nerd, that kind of says at the end, like, are we even going to speak to each other when we see each other on Monday? We've shared this experience, and it's been so profound and changing. And one of the other kids just looks at him and says, no, we won't. I probably won't speak to you in the halls on Monday.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like the wall comes down for a few magical hours, and then it just like snaps right back up. And you just know that that was the most real, authentic thing that person could have told him. And it was true. Right?
Yes.
Anyway, it's just such a great movie.
I agree. And I like how like they're in this. I mean, as I was watching it, I thought like it took me back to my high school library and being in there and walking in the halls and the things.
Okay, were you ever in detention?
I think I did end up in detention at some point. I think I did. Yes. Mm-hmm.
You did? That was probably like when I watched it, that's the most implausible thing. I never found myself in detention ever.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, never. I was. It's funny. It probably surprises you knowing me this now, yes. But I was.
I don't think you were getting caught. I think you didn't get caught.
There's truth to that.
You didn't get caught. I'm pretty sure I did go to detention at some point, one time maybe, and. I don't even remember what it was, but that's what I'm saying. Like they're in this scenario and they're walking around, and I think it can just be it looks so kind of generic, but what's the word? Generic, but relatable. Like, yeah. Oh, that feels familiar. That's the word I'm thinking of. Like
it's almost like every school detention hall, every school library.
It kind of looks like this. So they're sitting together and they're having, at one point, as they first start in the movie, they're sitting at separate tables and they're kind of all giving their snarky remarks to each other. And then at one point, they find themselves sitting together on the floor and they're talking. And then at another point, they kind of have this adventure in the hallway because they're trying to get away from the assistant principal who is there. They're trying not to get caught doing this thing. And then they have their moment at the end. And as you mentioned, they kind of walk away like, we're never going to talk to each other after this. So they do have these few vulnerable moments where they're expressing comments. And I think that the reason that this is so valuable for us as adults who are participating in this conversation, listening, for me, I think it's valuable because as adults, we have to be clued in enough to catch these moments.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Because kids often are just teenagers, or they're just going to give us snippets. And if we can catch those snippets, we're going to see part of who they are, and we're going to help them feel valued for who they are. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, that's what every person wants on this planet, is to feel loved and valued for who they are.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into that in a little bit, that idea that's coming. But so essentially we've got 5 characters, and let's start with Brian, who's the nerd. And Brian, at one point, he's talking with Claire.
Claire's the prep.
Claire is the prep. She is the princess. Mm-hmm. Claire's the princess. And so Brian says, like, when I step outside myself, kind of, and when I look in at myself, you know, and I see me and I don't like what I see, I really don't. And Claire's question is, what's wrong with you? Why don't you like yourself? And Brian says, 'cause I'm stupid, 'cause I'm failing shop.
Yeah.
And some of the other characters just look at him like, what's wrong with you?
Well, because he's acing every other class, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the thing that every kid should pass is the thing that he feels the most inadequate at. And he's just so shamed by the fact that he can't be perfect.
Exactly. Because Brian's challenge, the nerd's challenge here is that he's looking for acceptance through other people, through teachers, through parents.
And performance,
mm-hmm.
right? Performing, doing all the things in all the classes that all his parents and his teachers are expecting. And when it boils down to it, he can't pass shop. And it's just humiliating.
Yes, because he needs their approval to feel good about himself.
Yeah.
And there are teenagers all over our high schools like that, who are looking for approval from other people.
It's really true. And I think that sometimes these kiddos are the kids who parents really praise, because that anxiety to perform, you know, compels that kid to go above and beyond to do well. And so parents almost reinforce that, like, that's our kid that's, you know, he's our straight arrow. He's the kid that does everything right. He doesn't give us any worries. And the child almost takes that in, like, there's no room for mistakes. Mm-hmm. And their love might be conditional. I've never tested it, but it might be conditional. And so I think with kids like that, you almost have to, you know, reassure them that at some point something's going to come along and you're going to struggle with that, and that's okay.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's normal.
Yeah.
It's normal. I have a kid like this who really has almost like that perfectionistic looking for mm-hmm. someone else for approval, right? This is like something that I've noticed. And one of the things that my husband and I have tried to help him understand is that it's okay to struggle. It's normal. And we're here to support you through the process.
Yeah.
So that you can feel good about learning how to figure these things out with the support of your parents, with the support of your teachers. And then pretty soon you're going to be able to do it on your own and feel good along the way.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes like helicopter parents will avoid that experience as long as they can. They'll prolong it, they'll enable, they'll prop up as long as they can. And then at some point, this kid has to break, into their own life. And then that failure comes only, they haven't really experienced the stress of a failure or a disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
And they're ill-equipped.
I agree. And so I think for these kids, the looking for things for parents and for teachers is look for those kids who they're constantly, or they need that approval from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And as adults and as teachers, we want these kids to learn how to gain confidence in themselves.
Yeah. So recently I was speaking with a group of youth, and we were talking about emotional resilience. And we were trying to brainstorm, what do you do when you encounter a failure? What could you say to yourself that really helps you to move through it? And this young woman said that her teacher has this phrase that's called grow and glow. Whenever you bomb on a test, her feedback is, how are you going to grow and glow from this? And I loved it. And it's just like the class motto. Whenever you have a tough test or a tough assignment, it was really focused on being resilient and triumphing over setbacks. And I love that.
That is incredible. I'm going to borrow that idea. How are you going to grow and glow from this? That's so good.
Isn't it?
That is gold. That's another G for you. That's gold. That's gold. Okay. So now our second character is the athlete. This is Andrew Clark. This is the one that's played by Emilio Estevez.
Yeah.
So this is the character. He's our athlete. And he says at one point, he says a few different things that are really fascinating. At one point, he says, we're all pretty bizarre. Some of us are just better at hiding it. That's all.
Yeah.
I loved that. I actually love that statement, because the fact is we're all pretty weird. And some people are just better at hiding it than others. But his character feels like he has to hide it. That's one of his challenges, because at some point Andrew says, oh, I have problems. And another character says, you do everything everyone tells you to do. And that is a problem. And Andrew says, okay, fine, but I didn't dump my purse out on the couch and invite everyone into my problems. So he feels like, and another point, I'm sorry, we've got a lot of quotes here for him. He says, I could disappear forever and it wouldn't make any difference. And I just feel like this is a character who has so many things that are happening internally, but he's not telling people about it.
Yeah. So I kind of think my brother was like this kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that he just never ruffled any feathers. He kind of flew under the radar a lot, was a really easygoing guy, all through high school. And but I know that he really struggled, but he wasn't like in your face talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there would be times where like something would happen and my parents would kind of be surprised, like, oh my word, he's got like stuff going on. Like he's struggling with things, but he was just so naturally easygoing.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of tell parents, like, beware of those kids.
Yes.
Because they're so easy to just lull you into this sense of like, nothing to see here. Everything is good. And oftentimes these kids are hiding that stuff that they don't know how to handle, or they're worried about being rejected.
Mm-hmm.
If people really knew what they were thinking, feeling, experiencing.
Exactly. Oh, 100%. And Andrew is the athlete. And there is a book by Rosalind Wiseman, she's a psychologist, called Masterminds and Wingmen. It's an excellent resource about teenage boys.
Yeah.
And I love that book.
It's so good.
It's so good. It's like, it really will play out and show you all the different characters of a teenage boy, how boys are expected. And I feel like this athlete character, he is in the book Masterminds and Wingmen. He would be the mastermind, like the leader of the group.
That's right.
Okay. And boys are told, one of the things that Rosalind talks about in her book is how we put boys in this act like a man box.
Yeah.
And there's all these expectations that they must live up to. And that is what this character feels in the book, that he's got to live up to all these expectations. And so he doesn't want to show, doesn't feel like he can talk about the things that are hard in his life. And so as you mentioned, we have a lot of kids who act like things are great. Hey, life is good. I got nothing going on here. And parents just think, I have the easiest kid.
Right. And I hear a lot of parents or moms even say, being a boy mom is so nice because you don't have to deal with all that drama.
Yes.
And I think there is so much going on in boys' minds that we don't hear about. Last night I was running a therapy group for couples, and the discussion was about men and emotions, and listening to men talk about how societally it wasn't acceptable for them to have feelings, and from a very young age feeling belittled for having feelings, and how that leads to complications in relationships when you're an adult, because you need those emotions to connect and attach to your partner. And if that's been suppressed your whole life, it's hard to reveal that when you're so conditioned not to.
Yes, I totally agree. It was interesting. My husband had a recent experience talking with a bunch of men, and one of the guys mentioned like, "Oh, this is so great. Men don't do this. They don't in our culture, we don't talk about feelings." And he almost was kind of talking about it as if it was atypical and something that might not continue forward. And my husband thought, men have feelings, and it's great when we all get together too. And we actually need friends just like women do. Like those are really important things for them. But when we put boys particularly in this box that we think they have to act a certain way, it is counterproductive for our boys.
It really is. It really is. And it has lifelong consequences.
Yeah.
That are profound. Yeah.
So with this particular character, when we see this as parents and as teachers, I think the thing for me that I think about is don't think that this kid doesn't have things going on.
Yeah.
Don't assume that because this kid is so easy and like, oh yeah, life is great, that there's not something going on for him. The fact is there is something going on for him because everyone has things going on.
Yeah. And these are the kids you have to watch really close. It's like sometimes even just a flash of emotion across their face and asking, I just saw that. What was that? You have to really be paying attention.
And I notice that when adults and teachers, parents, when they do those things and they do it somewhat regularly or give these kids a couple of opportunities, these kids do open up.
Yeah.
They do learn how to trust adults because they recognize that adults are trustworthy and they want to share who they are. I think that's an innate desire. Wouldn't you, do you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need that.
Okay. So our next character is Claire. This is Molly Ringwald. Ringwald?
Ringwald.
Yeah. She's the princess of the group. And it's actually perfect because I think in this photo that I have of her, she's wearing a pink shirt. Is that all she wore in the 80s was pink?
Pretty much like her signature was that pink.
And it looked good. It looks good on her. She's got that red hair.
Who would have thought pink and red hair? But she totally worked it. It was her signature.
And now it's a thing.
It is a thing.
And we have Molly Ringwald to thank for that.
I'll thank her for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's fabulous.
So she says, we've got a couple of quotes here for her. So she says, the princess says, I hate it. I hate having to go along with everything my friends say. And the nerd says to her, well, then why do you do it? And she says, I don't know. You don't understand. You don't. You're not friends with the same kind of people that Andy and I are friends with. You just don't understand the pressure that they can put on you.
Oh, yeah. And this is like from the same author, Rosalind Wiseman, talking about queen bees and wannabes, which is what the movie Mean Girls is based on.
Yes, that was such a good movie too.
That was
actually.
such a good movie. Yeah. And it was based on this book and this social scientist study of social dynamics amongst teen girls. And what Claire is saying is really true. She is trying to maintain social acceptance with her peers so that she can stay on top of the heap. And that is a ton of pressure. But when you're on the outside of that popular group and you're looking from the outside in, all you see is, they got everything. They're so well liked. And not recognizing that maintaining that status is very stressful, as she said here.
Yes. Yes, she captures this. I think this idea is captured so well here, that this pressure that she feels to conform to her friends so that she can stay on the top, that this is actually hard. And I love the point that you make, that what is often missed in these social dynamics, even adults, I think, we go through our teenage years and then we didn't see it then, or we don't see it now, is that pressure from two different points of view. The pressure from the girl who's in it, who's feeling all of the stress of feeling like she's got to stay here and how do I stay here in this circle. And then the people on the outside feeling like, well, it stinks to be over here. And how could you feel pressure? Because you make it look so easy.
Yeah. And everybody likes you and wants to be you. So why are you saying you don't like that? And going off this idea of Mean Girls is, Regina George has the cool mom, and how many parents reinforce the pressure that kids in Claire's position are in by, help promoting their own child's popularity.
Well, because it feels good to them.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
Yes. It's almost like rewarding to parents too. And we want our kids to be liked.
Of course we do.
Don't we? I mean, it's like being liked and having friends, we all know is really important to kids' mental health. But it's also important to evaluate what are the costs of these friendships. And some friendships may not be worth that.
Yes. And what Claire is experiencing here, her biggest challenge is looking for acceptance from her peers.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great time at this point to talk about the difference between fitting in and belonging, because they are majorly different. Dr. Brene Brown does a great job talking about these two ideas if this is the first time that you're hearing about it. But tell us, Amy, what's the difference between fitting in and belonging? What does each one look like?
So I will not say this as eloquently as Brene Brown.
It's
so
okay.
I'm giving this caveat because I'm sure she's got memes and all kinds of things that quote her in a very perfect way. But fitting in is about conforming yourself in order to be liked by others, whereas belonging is finding acceptance for who you are.
Yes. I heard Brene Brown say that fitting in is the opposite of belonging.
It is.
Yes.
I do believe that, yes.
And it's hard because what Molly Ringwald's character is talking about is this pressure to fit in. These people don't actually like what she's experiencing. Is that it's not that her friends like her for who she is. It's that she's got to do all these things to fit in, and then she'll receive that acceptance that she's wanting.
Well, and this is kind of the origin of that imposter syndrome, right? If people really knew me, then they might not like me. And I had a little, I think everybody has this, right? Everybody's experienced this.
Yeah. And there is something to be said for a healthy amount of imposter syndrome, right? Because part of that is linked with humility and acknowledging that, like, hey, there's gaps in my knowledge and there's things that I got to learn, right? So there's that component of it.
Right. But I remember I had gone out of town for the summer on vacation, and I was probably somewhere in elementary school, like 5th, 6th grade. And I got home, and my very best friend is so sweet. She's sitting on the doorstep. This is how I remember it. Sitting on this doorstep, waiting for me to get home from the airport because I've been gone all summer long. And I am so excited to see her. This is a shout out to Angie Anderson. So I'm excited to see her.
I love it.
And we go strolling upstairs, and we're so excited to go into my bedroom. And on my door, my dad I had this like a little white erase board, and my dad had written, welcome home. And he had put my nickname on there that only my parents called me, because I was mortified that anybody would know that nickname.
Yes.
And my best friend is like, what is that? Like, she had never heard that. And I just remember being so mortified. And I know this sounds so trivial, but it's little things like that. And I like really worried, like, is my friend like going to go and tell everybody at school that my dad has this silly nickname for me? And it's just like that need to feel acceptance and to fit in. It's just like ever present.
Yes.
And I often think about that experience, and I think about how kids, I'm sure, deal with far worse on far greater levels, whether it's fear of poverty or family mental illness or other family circumstances that they are in, and things that maybe cause them to feel like they don't belong. And then do we create communities where kids can't feel like they belong?
Right. Well, I was thinking about this idea and how I know because I have heard about it from my kids, that we have teachers who do such a good job about helping kids feel like they belong in that classroom environment.
Yeah.
And they're all sorts of kids that are coming in, different personality types, coming from different socioeconomic places. And these kids feel loved and accepted for who they are in these classes. And I'm thinking of actually, I can think of several teachers at my kids' high school that do such a fantastic job at this. And it's the way that they engage with kids. It's how they are connecting with them, making class a personable experience, but also professional, right? I mean, it's not so, I'm not talking about personal as inappropriate, but helping these kids realize that, hey, this is an environment where you can show up as yourself, that we will engage with you, and that we want you to thrive here. And we want you to grow and glow in this space. And as a matter of fact, we know that you're going to fail here, probably. And that's okay, because we're here to support you in this environment. There are teachers that do a fantastic job at this. And I personally, as a parent, am so grateful for those parents that create those environments for those kids. We need more people like that who know and who have read, who have observed and practiced how to foster these environments in our schools, because we need this more in our community too.
Society is so divisive. I think, we can all agree on that. And a teacher really sets the tone for belonging in the classroom.
And sorry, you keep going.
Oh, I just think that, when you feel like you belong because a teacher treats you like you're special, it's never, I often say, like, as a teacher in the areas where I teach, that, people aren't really going to remember what you taught, but how you made them feel. And the people that have impacted my life weren't people that taught great sermons or taught great lessons, but were people that made me feel loved and cared about, like I belonged.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, because I think my favorite, when I think about maybe my top 5 favorite teachers at my high school, it wasn't the lessons that they taught. As a matter of fact, one of them was like the leadership teacher, and we were in there for like student council content. And during my, I can't remember if it was my junior or senior year. I think it was kind of near the end of my junior year. I was in this leadership class, and I was lonely. Like, I didn't have friends that I could sit with at lunch. And I remember walking around, making it look like I had something to do.
Yeah.
And this teacher, who was the athletic director, it's Mike Goen. I don't think Mike Goen is going to be listening to this, but he knows how much he impacted my experience, because I've told him that this was a guy that had, like, just, he did such a good job of loving students and loving them I'm talking about like a teacher professional way, but doing in a way that fostered that connection. And he helped me feel that I had a place at that school, and that he would just give me some jobs and things to do in the class, or as like kind of like an assistant athletic director, and some of these ideas in his role that really helped me get through the end of that. It was my junior year, and really kind of helped propel me to my senior year into some really great moments. But it was him that helped me feel like I belonged there when I felt like no one understood me among my peers in different moments. So to your point, yes, it really matters more how we make kids feel, and then these particular lessons, right, that we're having in class.
The lessons are just a vehicle for creating that connection. You know, and it's like, my hope would be that any kid that graduates from a school in our district is leaving with more than an education. My hope is that they are leaving with that feeling of community, like they are a part of a community. That's what they should be leaving with, not a diploma. Diplomas are important, but they're not as important as feeling like I was a part of something. And that something is a part of who I will always be. I belong to this community.
Yes. And I think part of that is acknowledging that not every teacher is going to connect with every kid in that way, right?
Exactly.
Not every administrator is going to connect with every kid in that way. And not even necessarily is every parent going to connect maybe with even all of their kids in that way. But I think this is why it's so important. And I'm not saying parents, it's not meant to say that parents can't connect with kids. They can connect with all of their kids. But I think that there's something to be said for having that community around kids. All these different players that come in to support these schools that, gosh, we have kids who are on sports teams. We have kids who are at work, right, in these work environments. One of my kids connected with another family in our community, and that family loved my kid in a way that he needed to be loved in that time, and helped him. It was like my kid needed to realize that it wasn't just his parents that loved him. He needed to feel love outside of the home as well.
Yeah.
And when he felt that, I really saw him start to love himself, because I think he had this belief that, well, my parents are just going to love me regardless. I know they love me, you know.
You have to say that.
You have to say that. But somebody else outside the community outside our family, saw his value in our school community and supported and loved him in that way.
Yeah.
And that helped him immensely with seeing his own value.
Yeah.
And that's what I believe our school communities can do for our kids.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what that's what our kids need from their school community. So when they leave, they have that confidence and support, and they know the value that they have, and then they can go out and give value back to their community, right? So it's just this circular kind of experience for our kids. So we've got 2 more characters we need to get to. Do you have anything else you wanted to say about that idea before we move on to the next character?
I guess what flitted through my mind at that moment was just how COVID made community difficult to feel. Maybe, it became more about online community rather than in-person community out of necessity.
Right.
But in my practice, I really see a profound need for young people to reestablish connection with living people in their community, spending time with people, spending time with their friends in person. There are all these social skills that are getting lost and making people actually struggle to feel like they're accepted in their community. It's so awkward that they're trying to fit in. And I just think as parents and educators, the more that we can be intentional about giving young people places to connect with their peers and other people, it just needs to happen. We need to kind of help these kids recover from those hard times.
Yeah. Great point. It's, being intentional about creating those opportunities and spaces for our kids and for adults too. I don't think that this is just for teenagers. I think adults need to be able to have those opportunities. And I'm seeing that around the Treasure Valley, particularly as different groups of people are getting together now. They're realizing how valuable that connection is. And it doesn't have to be gobs and gobs and gobs of time, but something about being able to get together. I was talking with a superintendent from North Central Idaho. I was just at the Idaho School Boards Association annual convention for the state of Idaho. And I was there as the Idaho PTA president. And so I got to interact with lots of different school board members and superintendents. And this one superintendent, he's a friend of mine, he said, students have to work really hard at my high school to not find something that is up their alley. Meaning that he was like, we have so many different clubs for kids. We have so many different ways for them to find the thing that they're interested in so they can connect with people that are interested in some of the things that they're interested in so they can have that connection. And I loved hearing that superintendents, right? Superintendents need to be aware of this idea as well, that our kids need these opportunities to connect. And that's why a lot of our schools have started, districts around the state have started to, really hone in on the fact that, hey, if we're not getting our kids in the 9th grade to connect with a program or content, then we're going to lose them. They're not going to have that interest. So we need, if a kid isn't necessarily interested in going on to college, right? The academic world isn't up their alley, then how can we connect with them as 9th graders? How can we keep them interested and engaged in academics? And this is where the career technical education comes in. And this is why the state of Idaho has made a big push for this. I actually we just had a podcast episode a couple episodes ago on how Idaho is actually a leader in college and career ready for our youth. And that they've got these programs that are working to engage kids in that way. And when kids are engaged in these programs, which are interactive, they're engaging in something that they care about, and then they can find other people who are interested and engaged. And that's that's one way for them to connect, right? And to grow out of this COVID experience that we all had so that they can glow and shine in their school communities.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got 2 more characters.
Yes.
And these are the 2 characters. One is, we can kind of talk about them at the same time because I feel like they're the opposite. So one of them is the rebel. This is John Bender, the guy. I'm like looking at his gloves on his hands, like he's got these gloves on his hands. And my 11-year-old is like wearing gloves on her hands this way. Like she's making some fashion statements.
This is coming back?
It's coming. I think, well, yes. She has not watched The Breakfast Club, but I'm just now looking at this image going, because they kind of
Is
look
she
like
a rebel?
I know. Well, they remind me of like the Madonna gloves.
Yeah.
That's what like
Oh, yeah.
these gloves like remind me of that.
Cool.
So he makes comments like, well, being bad feels pretty good, huh? And he says, at one point, who was it? It was the athlete says, speak for yourself. And the rebel says, you really think I'd speak for you? I don't even know your language. Like, this is a guy who's he's kind of like, what is he? How would you describe him?
I think he's a kid who feels like I'm going to reject you first because I don't feel accepted by you. So I'm reading that you're rejecting me, so I'm going to reject you first.
Yes. He has not found acceptance, and so he is directing his pain outward.
Yeah.
His pain, he's going to poke at other people and make other people feel bad about who they are because he feels bad about who he is.
Yeah.
And then the other character, this is the girl, Allison Reynolds, she plays the outsider. And she says things like, you want to know what I did to get here? Nothing. I didn't have anything better to do. And she says, well, if you say you haven't, you're a prude. If you say you have, you're a slut. It's a trap. You want to, but you can't. And when you do, you wish you didn't, right? And so this is a girl who her challenge is she's not found acceptance, but her pain is directed inward.
Yeah, like it's self-inflicting, right? She's saying, I didn't even need to be here. I just had nothing better to do but than to punish myself. And we see kids in both of these camps. I mean, sadly, these are often the kids that I see in counseling, and they're maybe the ones that get recognized a little bit more than we see with the other three that we were talking about that are the overcompensating, under the radar kinds of kids that find more social acceptance. These are the kids that really struggle, and maybe people, educators and parents and community see these kids and recognize they're struggling, but often don't know what to do. Like, how do I help? How do I help a child in my sphere of influence that's struggling with these things?
And what would you say to them if they ask you that question?
I think that kids, and this is kind of the upshot of everything that we're talking about, is kids just need to feel like they're loved and they belong.
And how do we do that?
I think there are a lot of things that we have to do, and one of them is we have to spend time with them. We have to recognize what is good about them, even if they don't want to acknowledge or recognize it in themselves. And one of my secret weapons is mirroring neurons. Do you know what those are?
No, say it again.
Mirroring neurons.
No, tell me.
Okay.
Tell me about this.
So it's something that we're born with. Mirroring neurons are in our eyes. And mirroring neurons help us to detect the emotions of others so we can feel what others feel towards us.
Okay. So how do you tap into that?
So do you want to know the distance that a mirroring neuron usually works? It's the distance between a mother holding her baby in her arms. It's that distance.
Okay.
And researchers say that that is like basically by divine design, because babies don't have words. And so them being able to look into the eyes of their caretakers helps them to feel the love that their caretakers have for them without words.
Okay.
And I think that when we take the time to stop and look these kids in the eye and we communicate heartfelt things to them, they can feel what we feel. And that those mirroring neurons send such authentic feelings to them that we can convey so much to them. So I think it's about connecting in a lot of different ways, but connecting with them emotionally, connecting with them over their interests, giving them love and acceptance, being willing to take the time when you know that they're struggling. Which at my house is usually like the middle of the night.
Yes.
Just when I'm ready to go to bed.
It's like 11 p.m. or 10:30 and the teenager comes walking in.
Exactly.
And they're like, I can just see my teenagers walking in and they're turning in their cell phones and, oh, they're not turning towards the door. They're turning towards me. We've got something to talk about.
Yes.
Or they just want to connect with you before they go to bed, right? I mean, there's been a lot of information out about this, that it's like, hey, parents, get ready. It's the nighttime when these teenagers are awake. And actually, they've done sleep studies to show that teenagers' sleep patterns, it's not that they won't go to bed at night. It's that their bodies are just not ready to go to bed yet. And so they're not tired yet, but they want to connect. And those are great opportunities to do it. It's actually at nighttime.
Yeah.
To connect. Like,
I've never had a teenager wake me up at 6 a.m. and say, hey, let's talk.
No.
Usually it's like, please don't turn on the light. Don't turn on the light. Because I'm trying to get him up for school.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, those moments, I am just thinking about all the things that you've shared. And there's just so much to be said for taking the time to connect with our teenagers. Because at the end of the day, that's what they need. And I so often feel like these kids need to feel that they're valued so that they believe it themselves.
And so often these kids are getting negative attention. And what we're talking about is really being able to look beyond that and give positive attention, because these are really the kids that need it.
Yes, the rebel and the outsider. I heard someone share once about this idea that she actually heard from an older gentleman. And he said, like, talking about this idea of what does it mean to love kids in a classroom environment? How do we show that love, that create that connection? And he shared that wouldn't it be great when these kids show up that we don't notice the two negative things that drive us nuts as teachers? What if we saw all the good qualities instead and treated them in that way for all the good qualities that they have? Because the fact is, all kids have good qualities.
Yeah.
And I heard this idea once that it was, if a kid kids want to succeed, and if they can, they will. And if they're not, then they need someone to help them figure out how to do that. Yeah. Because what kid wants to fail over and over? What kid doesn't want to be accepted and loved for who they are?
Yeah.
So it's about, as adults, trying to figure out all of those different kind of components and helping kids feel that connection. And it's interesting, as a substitute teacher, I've been that for the last couple of years in the schools. I go into these classrooms and these kids are not afraid to tell me what's going on at home, what's going on in the classroom, what's going on in the school, and how they feel about things. And it's so fascinating to me that, I've gotten to know a lot of these kids over the years. But I think as adults, if we show up with a heart that says, hey, I'm here because I care and I want to get to know you, some of those first are going to be easier to get to know and they're going to tell you stuff. But over time, the other ones are going to open up. And I heard this beautiful story actually from a student. I was long-term subbing last year. And it was a book club kind of experience. Your daughter was in, I think your daughter was in this class. Now I can't remember which class it was, but I'm pretty sure your daughter was in this class. So she experienced this with everyone. And it was one of the boys in the class. He had, as we're talking about this book, right? It's this book club in this literature class. And he starts sharing some of these really hard experiences about growing up at home with one parent and then having to move to Idaho and all of the different hard things that he went through to get to Idaho, and how once he got here, a kid on the baseball team saw him play, like throw a baseball a couple of times. And that kid said, "Hey, coach, I think that this kid might be good for the team." And long story short, this coach saw the student and got this student on the team. And this student really opened up in this book club session. Here I am, just a long-term sub, and he's opening up about some of the hard things about being in a home. I think there was some, alcoholic issues, some drug issues. A parent went to prison. I mean, he's talking about majorly hard, real things that are happening in his life. And I'm thinking, I know as a long-term sub, I've only been here for a few weeks. I don't know that I did anything to foster this kind of a moment. And I knew something else had happened. Like, what? Because some of the other kids were it was as if they had already known.
This was like a Breakfast Club moment.
It was a Breakfast Club moment, Amy. And I asked him, I was like, what? I mean, I remember thanking him for sharing his story and how it just was really created such a great moment for all of us in this room at this table. And he shared that the teacher, the woman I was subbing for, had noticed early on in the school year, she knew part of his story, and she had given him a book and believed in his capacity. And she said basically that, I think that you could write and connect. You could connect with this story in this book, and it might help you tap into your own story. And you've got a voice. And I think that you have the capacity to share that and do something amazing. And so this boy, this teenager, had a teacher that saw something and believed in him and connected with him through literature. This boy met a friend when he moved here who saw his talent and connected with him and invited him into this team. And this kid still had all those hard scars from his entire life. But he, in living here in Eagle, had experienced the love of a school community, of the people around him. And it was such an incredible moment to watch, like, just unfold. And these kids kind of already knew these parts. And I mean, it was just like breathtakingly beautiful. I mean, it was incredible. I loved being able to see that, and then to kind of piece together through the classroom experience all these different points that had gotten him to there. And it was multiple people that had connected with him and helped him feel loved and accepted for who he was, not who he needed to be or who he could be, but for who he was in that moment. And then he grew from that. And that's, I think, what we want for our kids. And that's what I think, like, the Breakfast Club kind of shows in these moments, that there are kids in all sorts of different places. And if we as adults open our eyes, we have the capacity to help these kids feel connected to themselves and to others. Because as I've heard you share before, those are two things that every person needs.
Yes.
They need to connect with themselves, and they need to connect with other people. Okay. Do you have any other things you want to share there?
No, that was just like so perfect. I was just like, yes, that's so perfect. And that example, my daughter was in that class, and my daughter came home from school and talked about how much that had moved her, and how his taking that risk led to other kids sharing in really authentic ways that, like, my daughter just said, like, I wish like every class could be like this. And she was so excited to go back because she said, we're going to like be talking about this again in the next class period. And I had this like spark thought, like, that's what kids crave.
Yes. It's exactly what they crave. They love it because they get to really be who they are and seen for who they are. And I'm remembering now, like, all these, you start telling something and it comes back. I believe this was senior skip day. I think it was senior skip day.
It was senior skip day. And I made my kid go to school.
You made your kid go to school.
And I told her, I'm like, aren't you glad you went?
Aren't you glad you went? And I think there were maybe 5 kids in class that day. So a class that should have had 25 kids only had 5. So we were all clumped in one group. And it fostered, I remember telling you about this when it was over. It fostered this moment as like this breakfast club moment where they all got to be real together and to be seen for who they are.
Man, I wish we could like have all those kids here.
I know.
Like just talk about it. Like that was a 2020s breakfast club experience.
It totally was. It was amazing. I loved it. I loved being able to witness that. It was beautiful. Those kids are awesome. And teenagers are awesome. But the fact is teenagers are awesome. And so I'm actually kind of excited because we have an announcement to make. Are you ready? Do you remember this announcement?
Yes, I do. You did message me about it. Yeah. And you're always like messaging me good things, including other funny things. And I read this and I thought, this is going to be really cool.
Yes.
Because we've done something like this before and it was just fantastic. So I love this.
Yeah, it was gold. Okay,
lay it out.
Okay. So I started this idea. It's called Table Talk with Teenagers. And I do it with my kids. And so then I kind of expanded it or just a little bit changed it. I came to you and I said, what if we did a table talk with adults? And we called it that, Table Talk with Adults, where we as adults get together and we have a conversation about something that is like, it's topic driven. And so it's not just us getting together and BSing, over like drinks and stuff, though those things are good. I'm not saying they're not. Those things are good. But we get together and we talk about something that matters to us. And so a couple years ago, actually it was just last year, we hosted at my house Table Talk with Adults, and it was the Breakfast Club and Teenagers 2022.
Yeah.
And so the awesome announcement is that
we had such a great turnout and it was so good.
Yes, that conversation was incredible. And the thing so what we're going to do is we're going to do this in January, and we're going to have 2 sessions of this. It's free. No one has to pay for this. Okay. And it's Table Talk with Adults. And the topic is going to be teenagers 2024. We're going to do one in-person one, and we're going to do one over Zoom, because I know people around the United States that want to tap into this that don't live here in the Treasure Valley, but that want to participate in this.
So to get ready, they have to watch the movie.
So to get ready,
that's got to be the homework.
That's a prerequisite.
That's a prerequisite.
You have to watch The Breakfast Club. And the thing that's gold about this idea for me is that when our kids are little, we're all talking to each other about our kids and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's so normal. But then when we become adults, when our kids become teenagers and we're older adults now, we don't feel like we can talk about these things. It's less spoken about. I've heard a lot of people talk about this idea that all of a sudden our kids become teenagers and we want to respect their privacy.
Yeah.
So we don't talk about the hard things. But the fact is, adults need to get together to talk about teenagers so that we can understand them better, so that we can show up for them better and create these communities that they so deserve. So we're going to do that. Just pay attention to my social media and I'll post about those things so that you can tap into that. All of this information will be in the show notes so that you, the listener, can connect with us, because we are inviting you to this. So at the end of every podcast that I have, Amy, I have 2 key takeaways. I do this every time. And so because you're here, you're actually my first guest on the podcast. Thank you so much. This is this is the best. I think you were my first guest the last time I did a podcast. I think you were my very
first one, best one. I get to hold that title until you do your next one, and then slipping in the rankings.
This is awesome. So 2 key takeaways from the conversation today. I've got one. It's not fair. I came with one that's prepared. So if you would like, I'll share mine. And then if you would share a key takeaway.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So my key takeaway from what I was thinking about prior to the conversation was that teenagers need adults to be observant and active participants in their lives. That from what I've gathered from our conversation today, that teenagers, they need us to connect with them. And in order for us to connect with them, we as adults must be observant and participate in their lives.
Oh, that's so good. I would add to that teenagers are very complex and wonderful people. And we think we know them so well when they're little, and, you know, their problems seem simple and easy to solve. And then when their lives get more complicated, sometimes they feel alone because their parents don't know how to solve their problems anymore. And I just think it's at those times we have to find ways to lean in to their lived experience and know that there are things that we understand that are universal, Breakfast Club things, but there are things that are so unique to them, to the time and place and who they are, and to honor that as well. And I just think when kids share with you, that's it's a gift. And I'm so grateful for all the kids I get to work with that open their hearts and minds to me and allow me to help them in their journeys, whether it's my clients or even my own kids. It's such an honor, and I really tip my hat to everybody who's in the trenches with our youth today that are wanting to make this world a better place for them, to give them better life experiences in our communities. Because the world is a challenging place to live, and they need to know that they're loved.
So well said. Thank you so much, Amy. You rock. And yes. I'm so glad you got to be on the podcast with me today. And I would just share with all my listeners, just check the show notes so you know how to connect with me and with our upcoming events. And I just would encourage everyone to keep up the good work for bringing together our school communities. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Our Kids, Our Schools. Your contributions are vital in this shared journey towards a thriving school community. So let's keep this conversation going on my Instagram page at the.alexis.morgan. Share your insights, suggestions, and experiences. Follow the podcast so you never miss empowering discussions and insightful resources. And always remember, keep learning, keep questioning, and together, let's make a difference.